Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us to discuss the latest updates on Soyuz MS-22 and the International Space Station. I'm Leah Cheshire of NASA, and joining us on the line today are Joel Montalbano, the International Space Station Program Manager, NASA's Johnson Space Center, and Sergei Krikalev, the Human Spaceflight Program's Executive Director with Roscosmos. To start today's call, we'll give both panelists an opportunity to provide opening remarks before moving into a question and answer period. You can press *1 to raise your hand to ask a question and *2 to withdraw your question if it has been answered. We'll go ahead and start with those opening remarks, and I'm going to turn it over to Joel Montalbano.
Hey, thank you, Leah, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. This week, I'm in Moscow with Sergei and his team, and earlier today, we wrapped up the State Commission, working together on the next steps for the Expedition 68 crew, and looking forward to the path as a result of the anomaly we had with the Soyuz. Roscosmos and NASA have been working together throughout this investigation, and we were part of the process as we went through the State Commission and the preparations for the State Commission and the decisions that were made today. I'll defer to Sergei after I'm done, and he can give you the updates from the State Commission. Throughout the process, in mid-December when this started, both Mission Control Center Houston and Mission Control Center Moscow have been actively communicating with the crew, informing them on where we are and the status of the vehicles as we move forward through this investigation. Looking forward, now that the State Commission has made a decision, NASA will take the next couple of weeks. We'll be working with the Commercial Crew Program and our U.S. domestic partners on laying out the flight plan for the next few months. So just we'll need a couple more weeks before we're ready to define a bunch of new launch dates. Overall, I'll tell you that the teams have worked extremely well together, both the technical teams and the management team. It is a true testament to the partnership. In addition to the work that NASA and Roscosmos are doing, I have been communicating with my international partners, with the Canadian Space Agency, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, as well as the European Space Agency. So with that, thank you again for joining us. Let me hand it over to Sergei.
Good morning or good evening in Moscow time. Today we had a state committee that made a final decision how to proceed since we have this malfunction on Soyuz. We determined next steps we need to do to stay on station, and for next steps how we send next Soyuz to fly to a station and how crew is going to perform while they are on board of the station. So if any questions, I'm ready to answer.
Okay, thank you both very much, and we can start getting into those questions. We will start with Joey Roulette from Reuters, and before we start questions, I should remind you, it's *1 to raise your hand, *2 to lower it. Please state your name and affiliation, and please direct your single question to either Mr. Krikalev or Mr. Montalbano. And with that, Joey, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Question for Joel. Does NASA agree with Russia's conclusion that the hole was caused by a meteoroid impact? And also, how do you expect this plan that Russia has to send an uncrewed capsule, how do you expect it to affect the SpaceX Crew 6 mission? And one quick one for Sergei. Roscosmos said that the crew's mission will be extended on the ISS. What does that extension depend on? Or in other words, I guess, what will determine their return date? Thanks.
Hey, Joey, thank you. Good to talk with you. You know, the work we've done, so we've done a lot of imagery assessments of the area of interest, and everything does point to a micrometeoroid debris. We have looked at the meteor showers that occurred around the same time frame, but that both the teams in Houston as well as the team in Moscow have said that the meteor showers were not a contributor. They were coming in a direction that was not the same direction of the Soyuz. And so everything points to micrometeoroid debris. We are in the process of getting some additional imagery, but so far we are in concurrence with Roscosmos They've also looked at the vehicle and looked at manufacturing, and I'll let Sergei answer any questions on that, but nothing was off nominal in the manufacturing of this vehicle. With the decision today to fly 0 crew in the upcoming Soyuz, the Crew 6 complement will remain the same, so no changes to the Crew 6 complement.
And I will add a little bit to what Joel said about our investigation. Originally, we didn't have exact image of radiator. We have information of approximate position where this hole is. We saw liquid going out from radiator out to space, but originally we started to check if we may have some kind of technical or technological problems that can be cause this kind of malfunction. But finally, at first we found that there is no any issue with manufacturing or technology of testing our radiator may cause this problem on one hand. On another hand, finally, with the help of Canadian robotic arm, we got image of this area, and we obviously saw that this is a hole in radiator, and unfortunately this is not hole in radiator but also hole in a pipe which actually hold this coolant for radiator. So this is for a technical point of view. And you ask about extension of crew on board. Originally our plan was to replace this crew with next increment in mid-March, but because we decided that optimal way would be to send this Soyuz with no crew, then because new vehicle will come and next replacement of increment supposed to be half year later, we will probably extend stay of this crew expedition 68 on board the station for extra several months. What will be exact date to send replacements for them is not decided yet, but it's going to be a several months longer mission.
Thank you both. We'll now move to Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. For either of you, what happens if something happens between now and when the MS-23 vehicle gets there that might require immediate evacuation? In other words, some evacuation level emergency. I mean, could you talk about the scenarios with getting the crew down with the existing Soyuz and Crew Dragon, how that might work out, or have you come to any conclusions yet? Thanks.
Originally, our plan is if we have some kind of malfunction on the station, we are trying to stay on the station as long as possible. Even more, if we have leak on the station, current procedure says that you have to go and leak check your vehicle, and then if vehicle is fine, then you go back to the station and fight for being able to save as much on the station as possible, closing hatches and looking for the leak. Although we have several scenarios when crew must leave the station, otherwise they will have a threat for their lives. And in this case, as we decided doing our technical investigation, that Soyuz is not good for nominal reentry, but in case of emergency, with extra risk, we are going to use this Soyuz at this point. Although together with our NASA colleagues, we are looking for several options to minimize this risk, maybe move crew members or at least one crew member to Dragon.
And I'll just add that as of today, like as Sergei said, if we had an emergency right now, you'd fight the emergency on board, and then if you had to evacuate, which would be a very rare occurrence, you would go in your respective vehicles today. But in parallel, we have been talking to SpaceX and looking at an option of what we can do with the SpaceX vehicle.
Our next question comes from Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hello. You mentioned that you believe that the hole was caused by a micrometeoroid impact. I'm curious, were you able to rule out an orbital debris impact, or is that included in the micrometeoroid impact hypothesis? And also, are you doing any additional inspections of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft before launch just to make sure that there are no potential technical issues with the radiator system that might cause a similar leak? Thank you.
With radiator on next Soyuz, of course, we check everything. We do this check every time, but this time we double check, triple check all procedures, and we don't have any issues with next Soyuz. Talking about debris, we still think that it's micrometeoroid because we have image of the crater on radiator, and we also made an experiment using special high velocity gun, and we did experiment trying to hit aluminum plate with the same structure with a small particle about 2 millimeters in diameter, and our result of this test completely coincide with our calculation. So our current theory that this damage was caused by small particle about 1 millimeter in diameter and velocity about 7 kilometers per second.
Our next question is from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press.
Hi, thank you. For both of you, please, it sounds like the crew is going to be up there close to a year now. Is that so? Am I reading this right? What was their reaction when they were told? And Joel, when you said that this backup option involving the SpaceX vehicle, is it the one up there now? Is it the one that's going to be launching soon? And is there any thought given to, if necessary, putting a couple extra seats in the Starliner for its test flight and bringing the crew back that way? I mean, if this Soyuz gets delayed from next month, the launch? Thanks.
Okay, there are a lot of questions there. I'll try and see if I can get them all. Let me go backwards. At this time, we're not looking at the Starliner. Right now, we continue to work the CFT mission with just 2 crew members. As far as any contingencies, what we're looking at is the Crew 5 vehicle. We're not looking to make any adjustments with the Crew 6 vehicle.
And it's only contingency.
And again, yeah, just for contingencies. Nominally, this crew will come home, as Sergei said, in the replacement Soyuz. As far as talking to the crew, the awesome thing about our crews is they're willing to help wherever we ask. And so the crews that are prepared, they're prepared to stay until the September launch date, if that's the case. If they go earlier and that launch date moves up earlier, then they're prepared to come home earlier. So the crews are, they're excited to be in space, excited to work on ground, excited to do the research that we do on orbit. So they are ready to go with whatever decision that we give them.
And today, during our committee, we had a report from medical community saying that crew health is in good condition and they go for flight longer.
I may have to fly some more ice cream to reward them, but that'll be what we'll do in some of these vehicles coming up.
All right, our next question is from Lauren Grush with Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm wondering if you can outline the biggest concerns you have if you were to land MS-22 with a crew on board, and what will you be keeping a close eye on during the landing without a crew? Thank you.
The main limitation main problem to land current Soyuz with a crew would be thermal condition, because we lost heat rejection capability on Soyuz, and in case of we have crew inside and we have all equipment switched on, we may have high temperature situation on Soyuz in equipment compartment and in crew compartment. So that's why, together with our colleagues, we are looking at options that if we need to use this Soyuz in case of emergency, we may reduce size of the crew in order to reduce heat load on the crew for landing conditions.
Our next question is from Andrea Leinfelder with Houston Chronicle.
Hi. Is this the first time that, kind of a rescue spacecraft has been needed on the space station? And also, can you explain what happens to the current Soyuz that's attached to ISS? Are you going to bring it home empty, or are you planning to land it in the Pacific? What's the plan there? Thank you.
When new Soyuz will come and dock with the station, we are planning to take some personal equipment from Soyuz, seat liners, spacesuit, safety equipment for emergency landing, and all necessary things what needed for crew to survival in case of other type of emergency. So when new vehicle comes, we move necessary equipment from old Soyuz to new Soyuz, and we are going to land all damaged Soyuz in a mode with no crew.
But we'll land in Kazakhstan on the land?
In nominal landing site.
Yes.
Actually, our landing trajectory and landing scenario is going to be close to nominal, and we are going to actually even return some samples from experiment and maybe some equipment we need to return back. So we will use this opportunity to return back some results from the station. And actually, when we are flying uncrewed Soyuz in February, we are going to use it also to deliver some cargo on it.
In addition, on the returning Soyuz, we'll be taking some temperature measurements such that just measure how the vehicle does in this scenario, such that if we ever had a need in the future, we have some additional data. So we're going to fully use this vehicle all the way to till it lands back on Earth.
At this point, we have calculations and thermal scenarios, but we want to prove this calculation with the result of real test.
Our next question is from Eric Berger with Ars Technica.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for doing this. Just to follow up on Lauren's question, maybe Joel, could you talk a little bit more about the potential damage to the flight computers or the temperatures inside the cabin? I think Sergei mentioned that there have been some calculations. Like if you were to put 3 people in there for return to Earth, what temperature do you think it would be at peak heating in the atmosphere, or shortly before it landed? Obviously, you want to ground truth it with real data, but I'm just wondering what your calculations showed. Thanks.
Okay. So what you're worried about is just so everybody's clear, it's not any computers on board ISS that's heating up. It's the computer in the Soyuz because you don't have any cooling on this main computer, and it's in an area of the Soyuz where you can't reach it. It's with a crew member. And so that piece of hardware will get in the high 30s degrees Celsius. And so that is the concern. And because you have this cooling, you're worried about inside the cabin and the crew's getting heated up. You're also worried about humidity inside and the hardware operating. And so those are the concerns that you're worried about. And what we said is for a nominal which takes a little over 6 hours or so from preparing the crew till you get to land, those temperatures would be in an area that would be not healthy for the crew.
And by the way, all this calculation was done as a preliminary analysis, and because of that, we have our flight rules saying that if this kind of malfunction we have in autonomous flight of Soyuz, we need to go for emergency re-entry. And if we are in a situation like now, when Soyuz is already docked with the station and crew is in safe place on the station, then we return Soyuz in uncrewed mode.
Our next question is from Irene Klotz with Aviation Week.
For Sergei, what date do you expect to undock MS-22? And just to be clear, you do expect it to survive reentry and land, but it would be unhealthy for crew members to be aboard? Is that where the analysis is showing?
As we said, we are going to return back Soyuz with no crew, and that's our primary scenario. That's why we are sending new Soyuz with empty seats to be able to rescue crew and return them back in nominal situation. As for reentry, we expect that maybe we will have some overheating of equipment, and still we think that Soyuz have several layers of redundancy, and if computer fails, we have capability to continue reentry mode in analog with analog equipment. So we have several layers of redundancy, so we think that Soyuz will return back safely. If crew would be there, then the temperature, as Joel said, could be in high 30s, maybe low 40s degrees centigrade, and temperature itself is not so high. But the problem is that in small volume, humidity can be high, and crew may overheat with high temperature and high humidity. That's why we are not planning to use Soyuz in nominal situation for crew reentry. So in case of emergency, when crew will have real threat for their life on the station, then probably danger to stay on the station can be higher than go down in unhealthy Soyuz. But that's why we are looking for several scenarios saying how we can do this in most safe mode where risk is going to be minimal. As for landing itself, as we said, we are going to send, actually to minimize the time when crew exposed in this risk of subsequent malfunction. We sent Soyuz earlier than we originally planned. Original plan was to send Soyuz for crew replacement in mid of March. Right now we are planning to send it in end of February, February 20th actually. And usually we need to have about a week for crew handover and moving all equipment from one Soyuz to another if needed. So at this point we also expect that we prepare and land Soyuz a week or two after docking of new Soyuz.
Our next question is from Tariq Malik from Space.com.
Hello, yes, thank you. And my question is for Joel. Joel, you mentioned earlier about discussing just emergency scenarios with SpaceX and utilizing the Crew 5 vehicle on station now in case it was ever necessary. And I'm curious what you heard back from SpaceX about what that would look like. What would that scenario look like in terms of how to secure the additional 3 crew members, their supplies, etc., with the supplies that are on board now? Thanks.
Okay, yeah, good question. And so SpaceX has been extremely responsive to this request, as they have been on all past requests. We are looking at options of 1 crew member right now, and that would require moving some hardware over from the Soyuz over to the SpaceX. Generally, as you guys know, when we have crew members, we also fly cargo home, and having the extra crew members would displace some of the cargo. And so what we're working with SpaceX and Roscosmos and Energia is some options where you can bring some hardware over from the Soyuz, strap that in where you would normally fly some cargo, and be able to fly a crew member home. And we're looking at anything from 1 crew member or more if we needed. But again, all that is only for an emergency, only if we have to evacuate ISS. That's not the nominal plan or anything like that. You know, as NASA engineers and Roscosmos is no different. We're always looking at, you know, what can we do to ensure the safety of the crew, improve the situation, and that's what the teams are working at. But nominally, the plan is when Crew 5 comes home, they come home with just 4 people.
Next up, we have George Dvorsky from Gizmodo.
Good morning. I've got kind of a big picture question, and just wondering, what are the big or the major learnings from this incident? I mean, the current situation is obviously not ideal, and I'm wondering what could be done in the future to ensure greater astronaut safety in the event of a similar occurrence. And on that note, I'm wondering, can we expect a formal investigation into this incident at some point in the near future? Thanks very much.
Actually, we already thought about this kind of situation, and we know that we are flying not in safe place. Space is not safe place and not safe environment. We have meteorite, we have vacuum, we have high temperature, and we have complicated hardware that can fail. That's why before every flight and before we start to fly on the station, several teams were working together developing emergency procedures. And actually what now we are facing is one of the scenarios. We were thinking about this scenario even before we start to fly. So nothing unexpected really happened. It's one of the scenarios, not very likely scenario, but this is a scenario we envisioned. And now we're basically following the procedure we were predicted, and we prepared to this situation. What we are learning from this, that in every specific case, how many Soyuz, how many Progress, is any other vehicle docked with the station, we look at additional scenarios. And actually what we are going to gain from this situation, as we said, we know that situation is not very good, but it's not some situation with dead end when we don't have any solution how to fight with it. But we are going to use the situation as additional test. As we said before, we have calculations, we have models, but if we face with this situation, we are trying to find most or less dangerous solution from this situation, and we are going to use the situation as a test for the vehicle in normal mode.
Our next question comes from Gina Sunseri with ABC News.
My question's been asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay, and next up we have Chris Davenport with the Washington Post.
Hi, thanks so much. Joel, I think this was asked earlier, but if I missed it, I apologize. I'm just wondering, is there a precedent for this in terms of having to send up a rescue craft, if that's something you could address? Because I think it was missed before. And then also just for Sergei to clarify a point, the crew's stay will be extended. That's because you need additional time to get the next Soyuz spacecraft ready for flight. I just want to make sure that's an accurate assessment of that. Thanks so much.
Okay. Hey, Chris, I'll start with the first one, and then Sergei. So, maybe it's just, where you sit, as far as, we're not calling it a rescue Soyuz. Right now, the crew is safe on board the space station, and, we've, by design, have space station as protected as we can. And while we protect for emergencies like, debris, we also protect for emergencies like fire and pneumonia, and we have procedures on board that are in English and Russian that are in both control centers and design. And so I'm calling it a replacement Soyuz. This is the next Soyuz that was scheduled to fly in March. As you guys and Sergei has said, it'll just fly a little earlier. From that standpoint, that's kind of what we're looking at. But I will tell you, there's no immediate need for the crew to come home today. All the systems are operating. Sergei mentioned, are you worried about, or I think a question earlier on the debris that hit the Soyuz. They looked at all the other systems in the Soyuz and they were solid. They did a test the day after this occurred and were able to operate the motion control system and other systems in the Soyuz, as well as we've been operating the space station and haven't seen any impacts to any other systems.
And continuing what Joel said, that replacement Soyuz was supposed to replace crew also. But because we send it with no next crew, then crew will stay longer in this Soyuz. And it replaces the vehicle but doesn't replace the crew. So I completely agree with this terminology saying replacement Soyuz. Your other question, if we had any replacement vehicle or rescue vehicle sent before, I don't remember this. I remember that after accident with a shuttle, when we were prepared for during Expedition 7, Expedition 6, Expedition 5, I guess. Then we also changed our initial procedure, and crew, what was supposed to be replaced by shuttle, was returned back home by Soyuz. And that happened before we were planning to send a rescue vehicle in case of emergency, but we never had real need to do this. So this is for the first time what I remember.
All right, our next question is from Elisha Sowers with Mashable.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. And I apologize if this has already been answered earlier, but I was wondering, so you feel quite certain that it was a micrometeoroid that caused the hole. I'm wondering how you know the difference between whether this was caused by a micrometeoroid or, some bit of space junk.
It was based on the assessment is based on the imagery that we were able to look at the hole on the vehicle, and then confirmed with the testing, the high velocity testing that Sergei talked about, and so they were able to repeat the imagery that they're seeing on orbit on the ground.
And also saying that we think that this is a micrometeoroid because some other object on this orbit cannot exist, because if it has so high velocity, it wouldn't stay on this orbit. It will leave this orbit. So it's obviously something just crossing this trajectory. And unfortunately, we look imagery of the station from outside, having some pictures from other places, and we saw some marks of micrometeorites hitting radiator, solar arrays, and even windows on the station. Because even flying on Mir and on ISS, we saw some small cavern on the glass, which you can see by your eyes. You don't need even special equipment. So unfortunately it's happening, but the station is protected in many cases for majority of these small particles. But unfortunately, this particle was extremely unlucky, hit not only radiator but even pipe on this radiator.
Up next, we have David Denault with About Space Today.
I'm wondering, hello? Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to find out, is there no way to repair the spacecraft? If you had the parts, is it repairable from space?
Now, this is a very inconvenient place. At first, this damage happened in the far end of Soyuz spacecraft, the furthest from docking port. We don't have any handrail, no any support structure that can let crew member go to this area. And even more difficult part that you need not only to repair hole, but also to fill radiator with liquid, with coolant. And the procedure is so difficult and so risky that much less risk would be to just replace the vehicle.
Up next, we have Zach Albart with Launchpad News.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for doing this. Two kind of quick questions. One, you were talking about bringing the Soyuz home. What type of cargo or research would you be willing to put on board if you were worried about the heating possibly coming up in the cabin? Or is it more just bringing home kind of dry hardware that you just want to bring home so you don't have to on the next one? And we've seen the International Space Station have to conduct a number of movements to move the station due to debris or possible conjunction events in orbit over the last couple of years. Has there ever been a consideration of having an extra spacecraft either docked to the station or always ready on the ground for a quick rendezvous should we ever need it to return our crew home? And if not, why is that not being considered? Thank you.
And so, let me start with the launch on need. We have just talked about, a launch on need spacecraft. One of the things that we're doing on the U.S. side is to work with the Boeing company to get them progressed in the sequence such that we're able to fly one SpaceX a year and one Boeing vehicle a year. We are in the process of looking at, is there some type of launch on need scenario we can put together once we have two vehicles regularly visiting space station. On the Russian side, I know they're looking at the processing of the vehicles, and because they had some margin in their processing, they were able to accelerate this vehicle, and so that's some of the type of work that we'll be looking at. And then what was your first question? I think I missed your first question.
Possibly onto the Soyuz to bring home if heating is a concern? Would you be looking at, I know you've been growing stuff on station and things like that, or is it more just dry cargo, extra supplies, dirty clothes, things like that?
Probably not dirty clothes, but we have some results of experiments we usually return back on Soyuz. Some equipment we would like to investigate to improve it for future flights. So things like this we probably will return back. What is not temperature sensitive. We know that we already discussed it with the medical community that there is no reason to try to return back frozen blood samples because in high temperature it may melt and it will spoil the result of experiment. So we are looking through different equipment or result of experiments we are going to return, and of course we will return what is not temperature sensitive. And returning back to first subject, we actually for a long time discussed that we probably need to have some kind of rescue or replacement Soyuz in case of emergency, being able to send in expedited mode. And for a while we even were thinking that it's good to have Soyuz on the ground ready to fly, and requirement was to have it ready to fly in 45 days. But to have Soyuz that is sitting on the ground and we are going to fly in nominal mode, we decided that it probably wouldn't be a smart idea. It's easy to, every time Soyuz is ready, we are sending it up, and especially when we had 4 Soyuz flying every year, it was easier to expedite next Soyuz and use it as a replacement vehicle rather than have one backup Soyuz just sitting on the ground from year to year waiting for this very unlikely scenario. So basically we are in a mode we also kind of but we discuss this scenario, and we are exactly in this scenario when we need to have Soyuz send a little earlier, and really situation with loss of pressure in the radiator happened in mid of December. So in about 2 months or a little more than a year and month and a half, we are sending next Soyuz ready to serve as a replacement vehicle.
Our next question is from Tim Fahrenholtz with Quartz.
Good morning. Thank you for taking these questions. This is just a clarification, and forgive me if I missed it earlier, but what is the reason for moving the various pieces of equipment from MS-22 to MS-23, like the seat liners and stuff? Is that just expediting the ability to get the spacecraft up there more quickly? Thank you.
No, it's just some things built specifically for the crew, like spacesuit itself, seat liner. It's actually built in such a way that you need a person to fit check this hardware. So if crew is already on board, it's easier to move it from one Soyuz to another rather than try to make another one and use place of extra cargo instead of personal equipment. So personal equipment is already on board, so no need to build it and send it up using extra weight.
And we've done this in the past. You know, this isn't the first time that we're moving hardware from one vehicle to another. As long as you move it from the same vehicle, Soyuz to Soyuz, you're okay doing that. And so again, it's a practice that we have done throughout the time the space station's been flying.
And very often, actually, for visiting crew, one crew member arrive on one vehicle and leave a station on another vehicle, and it's more or less routine procedure to move all personal belongings from one Soyuz to another.
Next is Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I think this is for Joel. I know it's a very unlikely scenario in the event that you have to evacuate the station before Soyuz MS-23 arrives, but in your discussions with SpaceX talking about accommodating extra crew members in Dragon, just some more detail on how that might work. What equipment would you have to transfer from the Soyuz to the Dragon for that? Would they be in their Sokol suits, or would they have any other protection that they would be wearing? And how would the seating work, et cetera? And where does the Crew 6 launch date fit into all of this? I heard that might be delaying from the mid-February target to sometime later. Just what's the current situation with the Crew 6 launch date? Thanks.
Okay. As far as equipment, we are still working that with the SpaceX and the Roscosmos. At this time, we are not looking to move over to the Sokol suit, but we're still working the details of actually what hardware we would move over. As far as Crew 6, now that the State Commission has established the plan for the Soyuz, we're going to take the next couple weeks to kind of lay out the plan. Where does Crew 6 go? Where do we put SpaceX 27? We have a Northrop Grumman mission coming up. There's the CFT flight, the Axiom 2 mission. And so laying everything out is what we're going to plan now that we have the decision from the State Commission. So I'm not sure what you're looking for today, but we just need a couple more weeks to lay all that out.
Our next question is from Robert Perlman with Collect Space.
Thanks. I think for Sergei, can you just give a status of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft and launch vehicle as it is today? What still needs to be done to get it ready to launch next month in an accelerated fashion? And where was that margin found to be able to accelerate its preparation so it can be ready?
Actually, we built this margin in procedure of preparing spacecraft for the flight. It's already on Baikonur. It's already partially ready to flight, and of course we need to do final inspection, and we need to assemble vehicle with a rocket, put all necessary shroud on the rocket, escape tower, so everything needs to be assembled with a rocket, and that takes some time. But as we said, usually rocket and vehicle sent to Baikonur in advance, just to be comply with this procedure to have next Soyuz ready quickly if necessary, and usually just waiting for time when we need to start final preparation. So now we just start this final preparation earlier than we originally scheduled. But there is nothing really different we are doing now than we were planning to do in nominal preparation. We just start earlier.
Next is Ken Kramer with Space Up Close.
Oh, hi. Thank you for taking my question, and good luck with the preparations. My question, probably for Joel. You have extra Crew Dragons available. I'm wondering, why not send a Crew Dragon up after Crew 6? Why not send up a Crew Dragon with one astronaut to bring the MS-22 crew home? Because I think in March you were going to launch Polaris, so you would have one available pretty soon, it seems like. Because also right now you don't have, if there's an emergency, a safe way to get this crew home. So I'm wondering about, if you could go into more detail about alternate Crew Dragon. Thank you.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, Roscosmos is going to expedite the processing of the Soyuz, and so they'll have that up there in February 20th is what you heard today. Plus, these vehicles are designed, you have a specific suit for a vehicle, so you have a specific suit you'll wear in the Dragon, which is not the same suit you'll wear in the Soyuz. And so you'll have tailored equipment for the crew depending on the vehicle. And to do all that correctly, you want to have the crew on the ground, you want to measure them, you want to do a fit check, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the quickest way to get to a safe configuration is get that replacement Soyuz up there.
Our next question is from Lucy Albord with ASP.
Hi, thanks for doing this. Sorry if I missed it, but when do you expect the damaged Soyuz MS-22 to come back and land in Kazakhstan? And if you don't have a precise date yet, can you confirm it will be after the new replacement Soyuz arrives at the station, so after February?
It's after February. As I said before, we need to dock a new replacement Soyuz before we undock old one, because we need to move some stuff from old Soyuz to new one. Personal belonging, as we said, seat liners, space suits, and survival gear, what we need to take it from Soyuz. We don't have final date yet. I think it is going to be mid of March or maybe end of March.
Our next question is from Manuel Mazzanti of Debate.
Hi, good morning. How are you? Question for Sergei, and I apologize, Sergei, if you mentioned this before, just for clarification. How's the status of the crew rotation from the Russian side now that MS-23 is arriving empty? Are you moving every upcoming crew mission to the right in terms of timing, or are you canceling any particular mission? Thank you.
No, we are moving mission to the right. And we are trying to return back to original schedule as much as possible, as quick as possible. But we are not going to cancel any flight. We just move it right.
Up next, we have Marcia Smith with SpacePolicyOnline.com.
Thanks so much. I was wondering, Sergei, if there are any plans for adding more insulation or something to this area of Soyuz now that you know that it's vulnerable. Do you see any design changes coming up?
No, this is technically not even very reasonable, because this is a radiator that's supposed to reject the heat. And if you put something on top of it, it will not do its job. So the unit is built in such a way that it should be exposed to open space to radiate the heat. So probably what we may need to do in future, in many cases we have double double layers of redundancy, sometimes triple layers of redundancy, but in this case we have actually two sets of pumps to pump liquid, but only one loop for liquid. Maybe in future, for future design, we may think to have about two loops, but this is really difficult to do it on current vehicle.
Our next question is from Kenneth Chang with the New York Times.
Hi, thank you. This is for Mr. Krikalev. I just want to make sure I understand your explanation for why you don't think it's orbital debris. Is it that from the direction that it hit and the velocity that's not consistent with something in Earth orbit? Thanks.
The reason why I think it's meteorite, because if you have some object on this orbit and the velocity of this object would be significantly different than the station, it will go on different orbit. So it wouldn't stay on this orbit with this difference in velocity. That's why we think it's some kind of meteorite come from random direction.
Next, we have Joey Roulette with Reuters.
Hey, thanks. I just wanted to follow up on Marcia's question for Sergei. Why would it be unreasonable to add more shielding to Soyuz to protect from these kind of incidents? If you could just go a little bit into that. And for Joel, would you like to see Roscosmos add more debris shielding on Soyuz as a matter of just general station safety? Thanks.
With the shielding, as I said, radiator is supposed to radiate the heat and it should be exposed to space. If you put something on top of it, it will reduce efficiency of radiator. Another option would be to make radiator stronger, thicker, but it's going to be heavy in this case. So it's usually in complicated units, you trade one thing against another one. So if you do something very efficient, in this case it's relatively fragile, but you probably wouldn't be able to protect something from the bullet flying 7 kilometers per second. So making just small protection wouldn't be reasonable or efficient, and if you have strong protection, it may be so heavy that the rocket wouldn't lift it up. So this is a trade, and this solution is close to optimal from my point of view. We may think about other way to increase redundancy or resilience of the system, but which way it can be done, it probably requires engineering analysis.
And then let's see on my question, as far as do I want more shielding, you know, the beauty of having an international partnership is we fly multiple vehicles, both manned and crewed and uncrewed, to the International Space Station, and we learn from each other. So both of us are going to take this as a lesson learned as we look forward to, you know, other vehicles come on the space station and what we can do, what makes sense to do within the constraints you have that Sergei talked about. And so, you know, that's going to be what we're going to do going forward. We both learn from each other, and we'll just continue doing that.
Okay, the last question we'll have time for today is David Curley with Discovery Channel.
Thanks very much. I had to step away for a few moments. If you've already answered this, I apologize. Sergei, in your calculations on the thermal scenarios, what was the crossover, the amount of time, the duration to the point that the temperature got to, as Joel said, unhealthy, and you talked about a more direct reentry? Could that still work? And I assume in emergency it would. And Joel, if I understood you correctly on talking to SpaceX, you're talking about their seats and their suits if a Dragon was to bring back additional personnel. Thank you.
For Soyuz reentry, nominal scenario for reentry takes several hours before we close hatch and we open the hatch on the ground after landing. So it's like 7 hours, 7+ something hours. we may have expedited scenario when we reduce the time between hatch closing and retroburn to return back to the ground. But again, everything connected with orbital mechanics. We need to start this procedure in exact place on orbit in order to land in a place where we expect the vehicle to land. So in these several scenarios, again, the temperature profile will also be different for different set of equipment used for the landing and for how many people are going to be in Soyuz and what time on orbit, how much sunlight and shaded part of trajectory is going to be in this specific period of time. So scenario for every in every case would be a little different. But what we said that really we think that Soyuz is capable to land in automated mode, and we think that we able to plan it in a such way that we land Soyuz in a place where we usually land Soyuzes.
And David, say your question again on seats and suits. I want to make sure I understood it correctly.
I think David has left the queue, but I think the question was about seats matching up with suits.
Yeah, so for this contingency only scenario where we have to evacuate space station, we will not have extra seats or suits for the extra crew members coming home. That's why you only want to do it in the contingency. We do have a plan using some hardware that we have on orbit from the Soyuz, a safe plan such that we could safely secure the crew members to the in the area that the cargo normally returns on the Dragon. And so that's a scenario that we're working with both the SpaceX team as well as the Roscosmos team members.
Thank you to everyone who dialed in today, and thank you very much, Joel and Sergei, for taking the time to discuss these updates with us. For the latest updates on the space station, please visit nasa.gov or blogs.nasa.gov/spacestation. Thank you again, everyone.